In a world already fractured by shifting alliances, deepening rivalries, and the weight of history that never seemed to fade, a single sentence sent shockwaves across the globe. Donald Trump, the former US president, stood before a roaring crowd in Texas. His supporters were loud, waving flags, chanting his name, urging him on as he raised his voice. Then, with fire in his tone, he declared, "We'll burn Africa." The arena erupted with applause, but outside that hall, his words ignited a different kind of fire. Across continents, news networks replayed the moment again and again. Commentators tried to decipher his intention. Was it metaphor, exaggeration, or a raw threat? To many in Africa, there was no question. It carried the unmistakable echo of colonial arrogance, of centuries when flames of empire reduced entire cultures to ashes. His sentence felt like history trying to repeat itself, a reminder that domination still lurked in the hearts of some who once ruled the world. In villages and cities, in classrooms and marketplaces, people whispered and debated. Could a leader, even a former president, so casually threaten an entire continent? For millions of Africans, it was not just offensive. It was dangerous. Words had always been used as weapons before violence followed. Memories of conquest, slavery, and exploitation resurfaced. Some feared that Trump had only said what many still thought. But in Burkina Faso, one man refused to let the words linger like a curse. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young revolutionary who had risen from soldier to president, was asked for a response at a press briefing in Ouagadougou. Cameras flashed. Journalists leaned forward. Traoré, calm yet burning with defiance, looked into the microphones. His reply was short, almost dismissive, but it shook the world. "You're just smoke." Those 3 words traveled faster than any missile. Within hours, social media lit up. Hashtags like #JustSmoke, #TravisTrump, and #AfricaSpeaks climbed to the top of global trends. Videos compared Trump's fiery threat with Traoré's cool dismissal, framing it as a clash between arrogance and resistance, between the old empire and the rising voice of the silenced. What made Traoré's response so devastating was not just its simplicity but its metaphor. Trump's fire was destruction, meant to consume. But smoke, as Traoré implied, was fleeting, insubstantial, dissipating in the wind, leaving behind nothing but emptiness. In calling Trump just smoke, Traoré stripped away the illusion of power. He suggested that beneath the bluster, there was nothing enduring, only the hollow remains of arrogance fading into irrelevance. Across Africa, his words ignited pride. Students in Dakar painted murals of Trump dissolving into grey smoke while Traoré stood unshaken. Musicians in Lagos sampled his phrase into songs. In Johannesburg, protesters carried banners declaring, "We are not smoke." It became more than a comeback, it became a movement. Meanwhile, the world outside Africa reacted with fascination. In Europe, political analysts debated whether this was the symbolic birth of a new African century. In Asia, commentators compared Traoré to anti-colonial revolutionaries like Ho Chi Minh or Gandhi, leaders who had stood firm against empires with nothing but words and conviction. In Latin America, newspapers praised the defiance, seeing in it reflections of their own struggles against domination. Trump, as expected, doubled down. Appearing on television, he insisted his words were misunderstood, that it was just rhetoric. But the explanation rang hollow. For many, his sentence had already become proof of a worldview steeped in superiority and disregard for others. He had awakened a narrative he could not control. Behind the scenes, government scrambled. The African Union condemned. Incendiary rhetoric against the continent. China and Russia seized the opportunity, praising Traoré as a defender of dignity, courting closer ties with African nations. Washington tried to distance itself, reminding the world that Trump no longer represented US policy. But diplomacy could not erase what millions had already witnessed, a clash of eras, of power, of voices. For African elders, the moment carried deeper meaning. They remembered the flames of conquest. The villages burned, the people chained, the languages erased. To them, Trump's words were not abstract. They were the same threats their grandparents had endured. Traoré's response, however, was ancestral. It was as though centuries of silenced voices spoke through him. His defiance was not just modern politics. It was history standing up and saying, "We survived your fire. We outlived your empire. We are still here." Crowds filled the streets of Ouagadougou chanting his words. "You're just smoke," echoed like a war cry. In Accra, street artists drew giant flames with smoke dissipating above them, replaced by bold African colors. In Nairobi, intellectuals held debates about sovereignty and dignity, while in Cairo, poets wrote verses inspired by his defiance. The phrase had crossed borders, cultures, and languages. It was no longer just Traoré, it belonged to everyone who had ever been underestimated. Even in the West, where skepticism of Traoré remained, people could not ignore the symbolic weight of the moment. Newspapers in Paris admitted that, whether one admired or opposed him, his words captured a universal truth: arrogance is temporary, resistance is eternal. Television hosts in London called it one of the most viral political exchanges of the decade. The internet did what it always does. Memes exploded. Some depicted Trump as a giant cloud of smoke blown away by a small, determined soldier. Others showed fire meeting stone, with the stone standing firm while the fire burned out. Humor mixed with seriousness. But the message remained clear. Traoré had transformed a threat into weakness. Diplomats worried. Could such rhetoric escalate tensions? Could it spark deeper rifts between Africa and the West? Yet at the same time, they recognized that something profound had shifted. Africa, often spoken of, rarely heard, had spoken back, and the world had listened. In the weeks that followed, the phrase refused to die. Protesters in Europe used it to criticize their own governments. Activists in Latin America borrowed it for their struggles. Even in the United States, some young African Americans adopted "You're just smoke" as a statement of pride against systemic injustice. The sentence had transcended its origin. It had become a global anthem of resistance. Trump's threat, once meant to project dominance, had instead revealed fragility. His fire had turned to smoke. And Ibrahim Traoré, a leader from one of the world's poorest nations, had turned 3 words into a legacy. Because true courage does not roar, it endures. It does not destroy, it defies. When domination rises with flames, real resistance does not burn. It rises. And so, long after the headlines faded, the image remained: a billionaire politician spitting fire, and a young African revolutionary dismissing it with a single sentence that outlived the blaze. The world would remember not the threat, but the reply: "You're just smoke."